Hi, everyone, and welcome back to What Blew Your Mind Recently, our bite-sized coffee chats where we explore the fascinating, surprising, and sometimes challenging things that spark a moment of wow for one of our Futureworld team members. Today, we're joined by the one and only Carla. Carla's an insights leader here at Futureworld, and her adventurous spirit shows up in both her running shoes and in the way she thinks about innovation. Su-Ann, do you want to tell us more?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kirsten. So yes, Carla is not only a powerhouse when it comes to insights and future thinking, she's also an avid runner and passionate about purpose-driven innovation. In today's chat, she takes us on a bit of a roller coaster. She's bringing two mind-blowing topics, both wildly different, yet equally important. From a recent Blue Origin all-female space flight, which had her questioning the ethics of space tourism to a certain extent, to a groundbreaking HIV Cure Trial, a world first led by Africa, reminding us how innovation can truly change lives. We're super excited for this conversation. So, Carla, over to you. What blew your mind recently?
Thanks, ladies. I'm really excited to be here chatting to you both. I think, yeah, to the surprise of everybody who knows me, my topic was not related to running for the first time ever. So glad that I'm bringing something a little bit different. But yeah, so the two topics that I wanted to chat around, one got loads and loads of attention and made sort of global headlines, and the other honestly sort of felt like it got barely a whisper. And I'd argue that the second will probably change more lives. So the first one is obviously, as you mentioned, the Blue Origin all-female spaceflight. So maybe for our listeners or our viewers who don't actually know what Blue Origin is, this is Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. It's his private aerospace company. So it's actually one of the few players alongside Elon Musk's SpaceX and Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic that's sort of fueling the rise of commercial space travel. And Blue Origin has sort of positioned themselves in their goal to make space travel more accessible, but actually only to those who can really afford it. And so why this trip made the headlines was, firstly, it was the first flight that they've launched in sort of over 2 years. And secondly, as you mentioned, it was the first Blue Origin flight that had an all-female space crew. And it's actually the first all-female crewed space flight since 1963. So it's been a while since we've had a woman in the forefront. And so the flight was only around 10 or 11 minutes, and there were 6 women on board, and they went to the edge of space and they returned safely. And there's been a lot of hype around it. Now, the whole mission around this specific flight, according to Blue Origin, was to celebrate female representation in space and in STEM and to inspire future generations. Some media called it historic and sort of a win for women in STEM, but a lot of the critics have been a little bit more skeptic and questioned really sort of what is the value of what is essentially just a very expensive joyride. And as a female engineer myself and a woman in STEM, I actually also found myself feeling incredibly conflicted about this trip. And there was really just two burning questions for me that I've been grappling with over the last few weeks. And the first one was, can we really call this a win for women in STEM? And we've been calling them astronauts, and are they really? I think technically, yes, they crossed what's called the Kármán line, like the boundary of space, but there's individuals that have dedicated their entire lives and their careers to space science and going into space and conducting experiments. And, some of them, even after all these years of training, they don't even get to go into space because the opportunity doesn't present himself. And now we have sort of these hand-selected, incredibly wealthy passengers that are going on these suborbital flights. So that first question kind of links to my second question, which is, can this money be better spent? And for me, that is the $1 billion question, which is about the same price as what it costs to get a seat on one of these flights. But are we really pushing scientific boundaries, or are we just building sort of a playground for billionaires? I think space tourism it's an innovative market and it's potentially a growing market, but it does raise some ethical questions, as you mentioned, Su-Ann. is this innovation really for the greater humanity, or is it for the indulgence of sort of a select wealthy few?
Yeah, I think to your point, it's so interesting. So exactly that. We need to be so clever in how we spend our money, or how we think about innovation, what companies do spend their money on. So I read that 1% on the world's billionaires' wealth could raise enough to feed 2.3 billion people, which is mind-blowing in itself. So
Exactly. And I think we often celebrate innovation at Futureworld, but the series is about healthy curiosity and questioning. So, why is it important for us to critically reflect on, how and why we innovate?
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, I hope for the real world impact isn't lost because while Blue Origin was sort of launching women into space, there was some really incredible work happening with women here on Earth and actually in South Africa, which is obviously the second topic that I want to chat about. And that's this groundbreaking HIV cure trial that was conducted in my hometown of Durban in South Africa. So really proud that it's happening on my home turf. But this was actually a trial conducted by lead researcher Professor Tumbi Ndungu. It was the first HIV cure trial actually in Africa, so on the continent. And just a little bit of an insight into what it was sort of a combination immunotherapy. So basically, they selected a group of women because young women are actually sort of the most vulnerable group in sub-Saharan Africa. So a really applicable group that they were trialing this on. And what was happening is they were issuing antiretroviral therapy to individuals, these women who had contracted HIV, and then followed that up by immunoboosting therapies. And ultimately, what they were doing was seeing if they could suppress or eliminate traces of HIV, which would essentially mean that the human body could control the virus on its own, which is absolutely insane. So the trial demonstrated that 20% of these participants were actually able to maintain viral suppression without relying on antiretrovirals. So, I mean, this is a massive win for science and for STEM, and could fundamentally change sort of how we fight HIV. But I think what was also just really special and like a big takeaway for us being South Africans as well is the trial actually really highlighted that it is feasible to conduct these complex research projects and sort of these clinical trials in what I guess people would sort of label as a resource limited country. So I think again just highlighting the importance of including Africa and the African population in sort of global scientific advancements. So yeah, I mean, yes, launching women into space was a great headline, but I think for me, empowering women on Earth to survive and thrive, that's really the story that blew my mind this week. And as I said at the beginning, I just wish more people were talking about that.
Thank you, Carla. It's been so interesting to hear you speak about these topics. These two stories, one about billionaires in space and one about curing disease on the ground. They do feel world apart, but you brought them together quite well. And I guess our question is for you, the audience, is there a thread that ties them together for you?
Absolutely. What's your hope when it comes to innovation? More awe, more impact, or both? If today's session hasn't made you think or blown your mind to a certain extent, I don't know what will. Comment to let us know your thoughts. We are so excited to continue this conversation and see where it's going. So thank you. Thanks, Carla.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Carla.